I never imagined anyone would see this part of me, not even my own family. Robyn Brown, normally calm and collected, crumbled in a court that was meant to be one of truth, but then turned into the platform for deception, secrets, and a revelation that left the entire Sister Wives universe stunned. Flashes went off, murmurs reverberated, and in that charged moment, all she'd kept secret, everything she'd attempted to control, came out. And if you think that's surprising, wait until you find out what happened next. The day started like any day, but there was a stillness in the air, nearly undetectable but dense, like the moment of waiting before a storm breaks. The courthouse towered above the little town, its stone walls gleaming with sunlight that seemed too harsh for the atmosphere within. Robyn Brown slipped inside, her heels softly clicking on the clean floor, each step calculated, deliberate, but under her calm facade, her hands shook. She carried a thick envelope, the weight of it pressing into her palm, as if the paper itself weighed down her secrets. The courtroom was a theater of silent tension. Lawyers and relatives alike shared brief, unspoken glances. Her kids were seated in tidy rows, their faces puzzles of bewilderment and curiosity, fidgeting uncomfortably in their seats. Each crumple of paper, each whisper seemed magnified. And in the room, Robyn's normally firm eyes wavered, an almost imperceptible tremble that reflected fear, and something else, something more weighty, regret. As she sat down, the judge's gaze swept the room, serene yet authoritative. Cameras, stationed carefully, captured each angle, each subtlety. Viewers at home would witness a poised figure, but at that instant, every muscle of Robyn's body told a different narrative. A quick inhalation, the clench of her jaw, the way she curled her hands around the envelope, these were things no scripted television could ever match. The attorneys stepped forward, words cocked like arrows, questions hung suspended, incomplete, ready to be unleashed. The envelope, sealed and ordinary-looking, hummed with silent menace. Robyn's thoughts stormed through months of preparations, mental debates, and sleepless frets. She'd pictured this scene many times before, but picturing and experiencing were two separate realities. And just as the room became tense in rhythm, a shift was made subtly. The clerk edged forward, the envelope slipped a fraction in Robyn's palm, and the courtroom leaned forward, en masse, as if it knew a storm was brewing. Each second was elongated, each beat amplified. The world outside the courtroom, viewers, critics, fans, had no notion how delicate this moment was, how one misstep, one flicker of the eye, one revelation could undo years of skillfully built composure. And in that heavy, almost suffocating silence, one question hovered in every mind, though none dared speak it out loud. What truth is contained within that envelope, and is Robyn prepared to confront it? The envelope quivered in Robyn's hands, an innocent thing with a message that could shatter worlds. As the clerk pushed it across the table to the judge, the soundless hum of the courtroom grew silent. Each eye focused on that tiny strip of paper, each ear leaned forward to catch the slight noise of its passage. Robyn's breath was caught in her throat, harsh and ragged, and for one instant, the whole room seemed frozen in her beat. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times in her head. The way she would enter, the deliberate look she would adopt, the soothing tone she would adopt if she was questioned. But practice and actuality are horribly distinct. Actualities do not wait. Reality does not permit forethought for the emotions that break over you in waves. Fear, shame, anger, sorrow, all coming at you at once. Robyn's lips were set as she struggled to remain upright, to remain awake, but her eyes did not lie. A flash of panic, a moment of unbelief, and then the mastered mask she always had on slipped for an instant. The judge extended his hand for the envelope, his hand steady, almost calm. Each movement was exaggerated, each second drawn out thin under the burden of expectation. Robyn's kids fidgeted in their chairs, a hushed exchange of looks flitting between them. They could feel the tension, if they didn't catch the complete extent of what was happening. And viewers at home, millions of eyes staring at screens, would afterwards replay these moments, frame by frame, in search of any indication of what Robyn felt within. The envelope was finally opened. A sharp snap of paper sounded like thunder within Robyn's ears. Numbers and letters, stiff and unwavering, proclaimed a reality she had feared for so long, but never expected to face so brazenly. Her gut twisted, and her hands clamped the table's edge as if clasping it could halt the world's turn. A look at her children, a look at the judge, and she knew that this discovery wasn't about numbers or data. It was about faith, about fidelity, about the tender strands she had worked so delicately to keep intact. And in that instant, time appeared to shatter. The air in the courtroom grew dense, heavy with the unsaid meanings. The murmurs of attorneys and the rustling of documents were overshadowed by the tempest brewing silently within Robyn's brain. And just when it looked like she might buckle under the weight of it all, the question hung in the air, unasked but impossible to avoid. How will this revelation upend everything she's fought for? And will anyone in that room ever look at her the same way again? The courtroom seemed to breathe a collective sigh, as if the walls themselves were drinking in the tension. Robyn froze, the figures on that DNA sheet seared into her brain, like a branding that couldn't be removed. She had been tiptoeing around the complicated dance of relationships in her family, the delicate push and pull of love, loyalty and competition between wives, kids and Kody. But right now, it all seemed tenuous, like a glass sculpture precariously balanced on a table edge. Her kids looked at her, eyes wide with confusion and worry. Even the baby, normally lost in play or distraction, sat eerily motionless, the question unspoken between them. What does this mean for us? For Mom? For the family we thought we had? Robyn's chest constricted. She longed to respond, to reassure, but words eluded her. She could only sit, taking in the enormity of a discovery no one could retract. The attorneys shifted uncomfortably, papers rustling, pens clicking. Every noise seemed magnified in Robyn's sensitized state. And yet, it wasn't so much the legal implications that did so much for her heart. It was the human side, the emotional aftermath, the way trust could disintegrate in a split second. She remembered the late nights she had spent fretting, scheming, managing her image, attempting to shield her children from the realities of their world. Now, that careful construction had been erased. A low quiver coursed through her fingers as she rested them on the table. She replayed every conversation, every look, every choice that had brought her here. And for an instant she questioned, was it all worth it? The sacrifices, the deceptions, the effective labor of being the perfect wife and mother. The response was complicated, multifaceted and agonizing, and none of those in the room could fully understand the burden. Then the silence, ominous, unbroken. A pregnant pause in which even the courtroom clock held back, waiting. And in that silence, the world changed. Robyn knew the room had shifted, imperceptibly, but irretrievably. Alliances would break, loyalties tested, and relationships she had taken for granted would never be the same again. And as her mind reeled with the options, a voice, cool, but authoritative, broke the tension. So Robyn, what will you do now? A question so basic on its face, but heavy with every secret, every fear, every time she had ever exercised control. And for an instant, the audience, both present and millions watching at home, caught their breath. Because the solution, when it arrived, would not only tell us what to do next, it would alter everything. Only when it appeared that tension had nowhere else to go, did the courtroom turn in a way no one could have expected. Robyn's self-control, already strained, was started to break under the glare of scrutiny. Each twitch, each blink, each quiet breath, was amplified by the unforgiving courtroom lights and the omnipresent cameras. The world was waiting, millions of eyes, no one daring to take a peek beyond the masterfully constructed facade of the perfect wife, the one who had always seemed so poised, so secure, so unapproachable. But that image could not be sustained, and in that moment of awareness, Robyn's mind receded. What did she say? How could she justify herself? Every well-practiced thought felt insufficient, like attempting to stem a tidal wave with bare hands. The envelope, no longer containing its literal contents but full of meaning, sat on the table before her, a cold reminder that control had slipped away from her. Her children stood in silence, their faces a combination of concern, confusion, and unspoken questions. One look, one pause, one tear, that escaped her eye, and the family dynamics would start to change irretrievably. And the truth no one had anticipated, was to be fully revealed. The lawyers, sensing the crack in her facade, leaned inwards, their questions sharp but diplomatic. Each word, each hesitation, each response was calculated, but the emotional undertone was uncertain. And just as Robyn prepared herself to reply, a sly but devastating turn of events revealed itself. Something, noticed up until then, was threatening to change everything. What everyone believed they knew about the DNA, about trust, and about loyalty was only half the story. And if you believe this is a shocker, wait until you hear what came next. For Robyn, the day was something more than legal hearings. It was a matter of existence. It was a battle with identity, reputation, and the precarious structure of family ties. Her conventional shields, control, poise, careful planning, were inadequate. She understood that this courtroom was not just a forum for legality, but a glass that reflected years of repressed fears, accommodations, and the thin web of her relationships. And in the silence, heavy and thick, there hung above the room one unspoken question. Could the family endure this discovery? Could Robyn endure it, undefined? The tension was so palpable that even the air felt like it vibrated, holding everyone captive, in suspense of what would happen next. And as the judge leaned forward to address her, the faint tremble in Robyn's hands reminded all who were watching that this was not television drama. This was life, unmediated and unscripted, and the consequences would echo far beyond the confines of the courtroom. Behind closed courtroom doors, out of the sight of millions, Robyn has been fighting this moment for months, perhaps years. The rehearsals, the mirror images, the stage-whispered reminders to herself in the dark of night, all conclude in this delicate place. She had so carefully crafted a persona, composed, calm, untouchable, a wife and mother who could do it all. But the facade is breaking, and the human woman below is peeking through, exposed, afraid, drained. Each look, each utterance in that room was heightened by years of anticipation. The children, their eyes jumping back and forth between her and the judge, felt the importance of the moment in ways grown-ups are prone to underestimate. Even when silent, their bodies communicated, a change in stance, a nervous glance, a quiet intake of breath. And to Robyn, those small, intimate movements were at once anchoring and shattering. She had always wished to guard them, to hide them from the cruelty of the world, but that fantasy had dissipated in the spotlight of public opinion. The attorneys questioned delicately, their questions sharp, but the ultimate challenge wasn't legal, it was emotional. Every syllable, every hesitation, every tiny facial tic could reveal a secret, a doubt, a weakness. Robyn wore the pressure of the moment, heavy on her chest, constricting until breathing was difficult. She envisioned 1,000 different things that could happen, each one more frightening than the last, each one drawing her further into the tempest. And yet, amid the chaos, she found moments of clarity, the silence between questions, the brief pause as the judge considered his next move, the subtle exhale of her own breath. These fleeting seconds allowed her to gather fragments of strength. She knew that this wasn't merely about standing up for herself in court. It was about facing the things she'd always avoided, admitting the fissures in her family, and confronting the fallout of decisions she'd made years ago. Her hands clenched the edge of the table. She recalled nights spent pacing her living room, handwriting scribbled in urgency, desperate schemes to master a world that would not be mastered. And now, all her preparation, all her strategy, seemed woefully insufficient in the face of the raw, unvarnished reality of what was happening. And in that silence, thick with tension and expectation, a single thought hardened. The courtroom wasn't merely a battlefield for legal victory. It was a reflection of years of secrets, compromises, and sacrifices. And if Robyn might make it through this, if she might survive this moment, it could alter her and her family forever. But the question hung over them, unanswered though unignorable. Would the family stay intact once the truth was finally revealed, or would it all shatter? The lights in the courtroom were blindingly harsh, brutally unforgiving, but they did nothing to reach through the tempest raging within Robyn. Her facade, which had served as her armor for so long, now seemed as fragile as glass, shivering beneath the weight of every look, every hushed word, every flash of the cameras. Her voice, when she did finally speak, shook, not with frailty, but with raw emotion from a person who had faced the full weight of well-kept secrets. Each movement of her body language conveyed what words were powerless to express. The clench of her jaw, the faint tremble of her finger, the sharp gasp before she answered, each action a testimony to the human struggle unfolding before one's eyes. It was no longer merely a legal issue. It was a conflict of identity, morality, and the tangled web of love and loyalty she had worked so diligently to preserve. Her children observed, spellbound, the unanswered questions in their eyes, weighing more than any sentence in the courtroom. They had grown up regarding her as the stable hub of the family, the equilibrium in every tempest. But now, they were seeing her vulnerability, her terror, her humanity naked. And in that nakedness, the viewer at home felt a direct identification, a sense of being in the room themselves, and sharing with her the agony, the doubt, the uncertainty. The lawyers came at her with measured caution, their questions probing, but the responses weren't found in the facts, they lay hidden deep in emotional reality. Every sentence Robyn spoke was weighed, gauged, and yet infused with the shake of someone standing on thin ice. She was aware that one miscalculation, a fleeting error, could change it all: relationships, trust, and the tenuous illusion of family unity she had struggled to maintain. And then the hiatus, the silence that hung, taut and charged, as though the entire courtroom had breathed together. Amidst this hiatus, Robyn's thoughts whirred through the option. How would Kody respond? How would Kody respond? How would the other wives react? And most agonizingly, how would her children come to terms with a reality they were only just grasping? Every outcome was full of potential heartbreak, and yet, in the tension there was a bizarrely incandescent clarity. And if you believe this has to do with legal theatrics, think again. This was a human reckoning, the intersection of expectation, reality, and concept. Every tear she cried, every quiet gasp for air, every quivering motion spoke a narrative that would never be possible to convey in a courtroom transcript. And as the judge stood ready to react to disclosure, the unsaid question hung in the air, haunting every inch of the room. Would Robyn make it through this tempest without losing herself, or would the burden of reality finally crush her utterly? The courtroom had been transformed into a crucible, and within it Robyn's children were silently learning a truth they were hardly beginning to understand. Their faces, typically lively or preoccupied, were now reflections of concern, interest, and wordless questioning that words could not convey. A small adjustment of posture, a sidelong glance between siblings, a swift swallow, all small human moments that conveyed more than any articulated declaration ever could. Robyn saw these subtle moves, and her heart hardened. She had worked for years trying to protect them, building a life that seemed stable, predictable, and secure. But the DNA news had broken that illusion. All the layers of protection she had so carefully built fell apart in a moment, and the underlying raw vulnerability was left exposed. Her fingers lay on the table, slightly shaking, and she felt the burden of responsibility more than ever. Each step she took, each look she gave, would be interpreted, decoded, and absorbed by the people she loved most. The attorneys moved cautious, asking pointed questions, but they were in the background of the unspoken stress. It wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about the tenuous threads of family stretched to their limit. The children's eyes tracked her every move, soaking up the doubt, the terror, the fissures in her otherwise unshakable composure. And in that instant, she appreciated the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't merely about a courtroom, a public fiasco, or viewer response. It was about the very essence unity of her family. A soft hush descended on the room. The judge, steadfast but stood ready to tackle the ramifications. But even his power paled before the tempest of emotion at the heart of the matter. And in the silence, the unasked question hung like a specter. How do you safeguard your children's secret you've kept for so long? He kept. Robyn's mind reeled back to peaceful nights, walking the halls in her house, scribbled writing on softly reminding herself to strong, to be calm, keep it together. None of that preparation could possibly have covered for the intersection of law, family, and raw reality. Every fiber shouted to mend, to explain, to comfort, but words seemed insufficient. And as the room stood in shocked silence, one thing hit her with absolute force. This discovery didn't only alter her tale, it altered the tale of her children, the tale of her family, the tale that many people had accepted as reality. And if you're thinking that's the end of the show, think again, since the next twist would not only put Robyn to test, but jeopardize the very foundations of her family's relation. And as the drama inside the courtroom started settling in an uneasy, the fallout was already spreading way beyond its walls. Text messages swirled quietly among family members. Whispered phone calls contained desperate secrets, and the tension that had held Robyn in its grip in the courtroom now flowed outward, reaching all those who were a part of her life. Even outside the courthouse, the world seemed to tilt forward, waiting for the aftermath of something that no one would ever forget. Social media erupted within minutes. Viewers picked apart each second of the courtroom video, each blink, each flutter of her hands, each slight change in posture. Comment sections branched into epic conversations, each spectator dissecting, criticizing, and empathizing to equal degrees. In living rooms everywhere, individuals murmured to each other, froze videos to replay her reaction, and argued over the implications of what they just saw. It wasn't all showmanship. They were experiencing a human reckoning, unadulterated and live, and the shockwave was immediate. In the courtroom, Robyn sat, fatigue evident in her eyes. She felt the pressure of millions of strangers' opinions bearing down on her, compounding the pressure of her own family's criticism. Each look from the judge, each carefully chosen word from the attorneys, even the slightest gesture of her children, reminded her that there was no going back. The DNA news had produced a split in the family story, one which could not be easily mended. And still, in the midst of the mayhem, there were pockets of introspection. Robyn's gaze remained on her children, and for a brief moment the world outside receded. She was able to see their terror, their wonder, their unarticulated need for comfort, and she knew that it wasn't about bar headlines, viral moments, or public perception. It was about trust, loyalty, and the fine balance of relationships that had been constructed over decades. The attorneys, now efficient, could feel the change. Their questions were keener, their tone calculated but cautious, aware that the emotional risks outweighed any technicality in the law. And the crowd, either in that courtroom or in the world beyond, could sense the tension building once more. The discovery wasn't an incident, it was a domino, and the next in line had already started to topple. And just when the tension seemed unbearable, one unspoken question hovered over every viewer's mind. How far will the consequences of this revelation reach? And could anyone in Robyn's family ever truly return to the way things were before? The gravity of the answer had not yet been revealed, and everyone, whether in the courtroom or at home, sat on the edge of their seats. Just as the storm in the courtroom appeared to have reached its height, Robyn made a decision that would leave everyone there gasping. A slight adjustment to her sitting position, a deep breath, and the choice that had been brewing inside her for weeks had finally emerged. She wasn't responding. She was claiming back control of a story that had threatened to spin out of her reach. All eyes were on her, all cameras trained on her, and for an instant the room hung in a delicate quiet. Her voice, shaking but resolute, sliced through the remaining tension. The words were precisely calculated, but each syllable held the emotional heft of a woman facing her ultimate fears and the fallout from years of secrets. It wasn't about legal posturing any longer. It was about family and identity, and the tender web of trust that had been drawn to its breaking point. And as she talked, small responses quivered through the room. The judge leaned in. The lawyers looked at each other with rapid glances, and her children's faces showed a combination of awe, perplexity, and guarded optimism. For the television audience at home, it was an instant of stunning closeness. The cameras caught not only her words but the micro-expression, the clenched jaw, the tremble in her fingers, the flash of tears that were about to spill. These were the human particulars that rendered the moment so raw, so compelling, so impossible to turn away from. And yet, despite her standing up and asserting herself, the tension underlying all of it refused to abate. The ramifications of her choice extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom, promising to redefine relationships, challenge loyalties, and reframe the family dynamic in ways none of them could have imagined. And if you think that was the end of the drama, think again. The envelope, the figures, the unspoken realities, they were triggers, not ends. Every soft smile, every hesitant look, every murmured conversation between relatives suggested a ripple effect still in motion, touching corners of the family's life that had previously been safe. Robyn's decision was the spark, but the flames were just starting. At that instant, she understood what was most important. Controlling the story wasn't about perfection, control, or never making mistakes. It was about authenticity, grit, and facing the repercussions of long-buried truths head-on. And as she sat down again, closing her eyes for a moment to find strength, the crowd could sense the gravity of the moment bearing down, not only on her, but on everyone involved in this family. And just as the courtroom settled into this uncomfortable cadence, one unspoken question hung in the air, dense and impossible to escape. Could one choice really change everything, Or would the consequences just keep spreading out like ripples on a pond, uncoiling the family in ways no one could even manipulate? The courtroom appeared to hold its breath, while the ramifications of Robyn's choice slowly began to unwind. The heaviness of every look, every word, every movement weighed down not only on her, but on the family who sat behind her. The tension was electric, the kind that makes minutes seem like seconds, and seconds drag into forever. Robyn's fingers lightly held onto the table, but in her chest, her heart thundered like a storm she had been waiting for a long time, but never quite ready to encounter. Her children fidgeted in their seats, eyes wide, faces a subtle balance of fear, comprehension, and unspoken question. Each delicate motion, the clenched fist, the slight shake of the head, the tiny release of a quivering breath, said it all. And in that collective stillness, Robyn understood that this instant was not for the sake of legal results or public opinion. It was about human weakness, about the tenuous ties that bind families together, and about the profound unspoken realities that only reveal themselves under great duress. The attorneys, who sensed both her resiliency and her weakness, moved with measured care. Their queries were straightforward, yet infused with subtext, asking questions that weren't merely factual in nature, but emotional. Every response she provided, each hesitant hesitation, each slight change in body language spoke volumes more than words ever could. And though the cameras recorded the moment for millions of at-home spectators, it was the intangible cues, the slight shaking in her hands, the flash of tears in her eyes, the brief look at her children, that really spoke volume. And amidst the silence that followed, heavy and near pulsating, Robyn permitted herself a fleeting moment of introspection. She remembered the months of preparation, the pacing and worrying on nights, the endless internal wrangling of what to say and what to keep hidden. All those hours had culminated in this, an intersection of truth and outcome that no one could have written, no one could have foreseen, and no one could now reverse. And just when the courtroom appeared to settle, Robyn reached a conclusion of great depth. This was larger than her. Larger than the DNA testing, larger than the opinion of strangers, larger than one decision. This was a question of trust, of honesty, of the irreversible formation of her family's narrative. Each micro-expression, each movement, each tiny pivot in tone, would reverberate far beyond today. And in that introspection, there was one question that hung, weighed and unavoidable, not only for Robyn, but for all viewers. When the truth is finally revealed, will love be able to withstand it, or will secrets prove too heavy a burden to bear? As the courtroom drama edged towards its official conclusion, the true effect of the DNA disclosure started to ripple silently, but insidiously, throughout Robyn's family. It was not merely the public glare and the blinding camera lights, it was the silent tension that hung in the air, a pressure that was far more burdensome than any judicial decision. The kids, sitting but fidgety, looked older than they were, learning things they never asked to learn, and facts they never thought they had to encounter. Each look shared, each pause in motion, bore unvoiced questions demanding answers. What does this imply for us? For our mom? For the whole family? Robyn's mind drifted, thinking back on all the conversations she had ever shared with Kody, her co-wives, her kids. She recalled the little mundane things, the quiet breakfasts in the morning, the laughter on the couch, late nights at bedtime. All those things now seemed delicate, as though each memory might become undone, reinterpreted by the secret now known to the world. And in that silent accounting, she understood that the courtroom theater, all show that it was mere epidermis. The deeper churn was only just starting. Outside, the world responded in real time. Social media timelines were filled with snippets and screenshots. Each small movement of Robyn's shaking hands, flash of tears, momentary looks of uncertainty, broken down, discussed and disseminated thousands of times over. And as the online fervor unfolded, the family itself grappled with a quieter, more intimate drama. Conversations once easy now had consequences. Each utterance, each look, each silence had the power to either ignite tension or mend peace. In the midst of this turbulence, Robyn attempted to find solid ground. She saw tiny human things, the way her youngest fidgeted with a sleeve, the way her eldest refused eye contact, the way delicate looks of confusion passed over her children's faces. It was these little moments that reminded her that the devastation wasn't ethereal or hypothetical. It was flesh and blood, and intimately personal. It was in the eyes of the children that she cherished, in the bonds that she had worked years to build, and in the thin rope that kept her family intact. And in that dense quiet, one question remained, inexorable and insistent. The courtroom uncovered the truth. How would the family recover from it? Would trust once broken ever be restored again? Or had the ground been irretrievably changed? As the afternoon passed and the courtroom cleared, the reverberations of the DNA bombshell stayed behind like a choking mist over Robyn's household. The lights were out, the cameras were still, but the burden of reality still pressed soundlessly upon every heart in the home. What had started as a formality appearance had become a reckoning none of them could avoid. Every member of the family, in their own way, was compelled to face not only the facts, but the feelings those facts brought to the surface. Fear, betrayal, confusion, and a desperate need for clarity and stability. Robyn made her way slowly down the empty halls of her house, the familiar rooms seeming strange, almost alien. The laughter and familiarity of bygone days appeared temporarily arrested, usurped by a sharp consciousness that life, as they had known it, was altered. She stood for a moment at a window, observing the sun's rays illuminate the slats of the blinds, illuminate dust motes with their light. And in that brief instant of quietude, she understood something profound. The tale didn't end on the courtroom floor. It was only starting. Her children hung back, uncertain, wary. The implied questions hung heavy in the air. Will it ever be normal again? Can we ever quite trust one another? Robyn's heart hurt with compassion and shame, knowing that though the DNA evidence was true, the emotional toll was far larger, far more complicated, and far more unwieldy than any piece of paper could possibly make manifest. The battle was far from over. The healing, if it came, would be slow and take understanding and daring. Outside, the public remained in witness. Footage of her courtroom breakdown went viral, and there was argument, pity, and judgment. People analyzed each look, each tear, each face, making up their own stories, and no one could sense the nuances, the inner strength in her gaze, the momentary pauses of self-doubt, the way she struggled to compose herself for the sake of her children. This was a tale that could not be completely translated onto television. It had to be experienced. And in the quiet of the night, as family members grouped together in small groups, the question hung, pending, unasked but impossible to avoid. When the truth is finally revealed, can love endure it? Or will the burden of secrets be too much to carry? The courtroom may have shut down, the cameras may have stopped rolling, but the story, Robyn's story, her family's story, went on raw, unfinished, and very human. And as you see it play out, one question remains for every observer. If you were Robyn, could you endure a revelation that upends everything you've constructed? Or would the pressure prove too great to endure? Even as the shadows stretched across the family house in the evening, the aftershocks of the courtroom drama would not subside. Each room felt charged with an intangible tension, as if walls themselves had soaked up the burden of secrets spilled and emotions bared. Robyn stepped silently, her movements cautious but purposeful, knowing that every movement, every look, could be observed by her children, by the co-wives, by herself. No cameras, no flashbulbs, no stage drama existed here. Just hard, unvarnished truth. Her kids hung around, some sitting in silence, others wandering back and forth, each with their own personal tempest of feeling. The atmosphere was thick with questions, unspoken and unspoken for now. What does this mean for us? For Mom? For the family we thought we knew? Robyn's chest contracted as she understood that the DNA revelation was not merely a public scandal. Daily became a deeply personal reckoning for every member of the family. Each look, each hesitation, each muffled sigh was a mirror reflection of lives now forever changed. Out in the world, people went on reacting. Social media accounts flared with analysis, judgment, and debate. Footage of her courtroom breakdown ran in endless loops, frames picked apart. Audiences provided commentary, forecasts, and condolences. But no one experienced the nuance, the shakiness in her palms, the flutter of uncertainty across her face, the quiet oppression of responsibility bearing down on every choice she had ever made. These were moments human, intensely intimate, but they had been made everybody's business, picked apart and argued by millions who would never be able to comprehend. And in that silence, Robyn learned something critical. The courtroom had unveiled facts, but it had not unveiled the heart of the tale. The richness of love, trust, and the fragile strands that keep a family intact. The revelation was a spark, but the flame was still expanding, uncontainable, unpredictable, and profoundly transmutation. There was a quiet that came suddenly, Robyn hesitated, gazing at her kids, then at the empty spaces that had been occupied by the others, and something occurred to her with impact. Even in the aftermath, questions lingered, heavy and unresolved. Would her family survive the truth? Could they forgive, rebuild, or would the burden of secrets finally crack them apart? And as she turned away, one last tension moved through the room, the unspoken, undeniable sense that the story wasn't finished. The cameras might have stopped rolling, the public might be guessing, but the human drama, the feelings, the choices, the outcomes was just starting. And so the question persists, haunting and unescapable. When the truth at last emerges, and nothing is hidden, who will be standing, and who will be lost forevermore? The house was still now, but the silence was dense with unspoken truth. Robyn sat in the living room, the pressure of the day on her shoulders like never before. The courtroom, the cameras, the flash of lights, they were all behind her now, but the tempest of emotions lingered. She gazed at her children, their expressions etched with confusion, fear, and the soft sheen of comprehension that only erupts when innocence encounters cruel reality. Every minute detail, the angle of a head, a bunched fist, the way one child toyed with a sleeve, spoke louder than any words ever could. Robyn's mind drifted through the maze of her life, the things she had sacrificed, the image she had cultivated with such care, the equilibrium she had attempted to balance between herself, her co-wives, and Kody. And now, all of it in one day, was crumbling, vulnerable, as fragile as glass, perched on the edge of a counter. She knew that all preparation would never have prepared her for this. The naked intensity of truth exposed, and the uncertain blowback that would ensue. On the outside, the world kept reacting. Twitter posts, tweets, and videos circulated like fire, analyzing every smile, every quiver, every hesitation from the courtroom. Millions speculated, sympathized, and scorned, but none were able to really know what it was like to live the truth instead of seeing it. And Robyn knew something important. This was not about judgment or being famous. This was about actual people, actual feelings, and repercussions of decisions that had rippling effects beyond her control. And in the stillness of the night, a new awareness emerged. This was not a conclusion. It was a start. A start of talks that had to be initiated, of faith that needed to be restored, of bonds that had to be reassessed. Each look at her children made her think of what was hanging in the balance, and each intake of breath reminded her of the seriousness of the situation. The past could never be erased, and the future was indeterminate. And so the book ends on a question that won't be answered. When the truth finally comes out, can love handle it, or will the burden of secrets prove too heavy for any family to carry? We are left as observers, not with closure, but with thought, with questions, and with a haunting sense of awareness. Some truths aren't just exposed, they redefine the very world around us. And for Robyn Brown, for her kids, and for all who are linked, the true journey is only now beginning.